Welcome to San Diego Integral, June 10th, 2023. Our topic this month, Zen, Integral and Shadow, A Path to Freedom, presented by Keith Martin Smith.
So welcome to San Diego Integral. We're a group of integralists that meet monthly, the second Saturday every month, right here at this wavelength. I'm Tom Habib, and I'm a member of the leadership team. We have a great presentation today. Zen, Integral and Shadow, A Path to Freedom, with Keith Martin Smith, who is here with us today. We'll begin shortly, but I first want to mention this meeting's being recorded. If you don't want to be seen on video, you can turn off your camera, although we like to have everybody present. It just creates a better space. This link will be recorded and posted on Meetup in a day or two and on SDI's YouTube channel. Did you know we have a YouTube channel? And you can also find out about future events on our website, sandiegointegral.org. We're also on Meetup and Facebook, and you can find the links to future events on there as well. One of the advantages of joining one of these websites is that you get notifications automatically as new events are added, and it doesn't cost anything. If you have questions or comments about the meeting, you're welcome to contact one of the leadership team through either Meetup or Facebook, or a quick private message to us today. Next month, we will meet on July 8th, and we have Luke Healy doing Integral Prayer, a participatory prayer for transformation and divine becoming. Finally, we invite you to make a small donation. Donations help to cover costs and to buy equipment we're going to need shortly. So a few more housekeeping details. We may have Q&A segments, and you can either unmute yourself and speak or put the question into the chat. We have people monitoring it in order to ask the question. Or you can use the raise your hand down the bottom of the screen. Right after the meeting, we'll have our usual informal chat for 30 to 60 minutes for further exploration and sharing. And you're welcome to stay for that, depending how late it is. Wow, so many familiar faces I saw in Europe. Before we start the presentation today, we'd like to take a moment, welcome the newcomers. If you're new or new enough, please unmute yourself and briefly say your name, where you're calling from, and how you heard about San Diego Integral. So I see a few new people already. Anyone want to go first and unmute yourself?
I am Mike DeVries, and I heard about you through Meet Me, and I decided to look into it and see what all this was about.
Welcome aboard, Mike.
I thank you.
You're local, Oceanside?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, hi, I'm Birgit. I'm from Germany. It's 1 a.m. and I met Tom at the IEC 2023, so just 2 weeks ago, and Christine and Normali and who else is here? Phyllis. So I just, that is the time I need to get up and spend it with you, even if it's in the middle of the night.
Welcome. I think you've been here before, but you're new enough.
Yeah, I just don't cause any trouble. I've been here before. Used to live in San Diego and am on Integral Life a lot and enjoy being with you all.
Good to have you.
Thank you.
Tom, I know you've been here before, but why don't you weigh in so a lot of people can get to know you?
Are you speaking to me, Tom?
Yep.
Well, I was hoping to meet a few people like Molly at the IEC, but after 3.5 years of not being sick, I got COVID 2 weeks before, but at least Lily Trong got to go in my place. So I haven't been here for a while because I got so burned out in Zooms. I just stopped a few months ago, but I'm starting again with select groups. So thanks for having me.
Good to see you, Tom. Christopher, you look new.
Yes, so I used to attend the San Diego Integral in person about 10 years ago or so, when it was at Kabir's house. I joined the Zoom group a couple weeks ago because my friend Karen was presenting, and that was pretty cool. And then I saw that Keith Martin Smith was presenting, and I have done some retreat with Junpo before, and I was interested to hear what he has to say. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Welcome aboard. Olaf, the physicist from Sweden.
Yes, I'm here again. So great to see the people that I met at IEC. And wonderful to continue that experience in this way, even if it's middle of the night. Whatever.
Jeez. Welcome aboard.
I'm going to jump in, Tom. I see Kathy Bliss came in and she's new. Kathy, we're introducing ourselves and where we're from and how we got here. Okay, maybe later.
Well, it's Steve.
Okay, there we go. Sorry. It made me put in new passwords and everything, having issues. I'm from Escondido, and I think this is my first Integral Zoom meeting. Thank you, Eloy, for inviting me.
Welcome aboard. Stephen, you look relatively new.
I am. My name's Steve Hansen. I live in San Diego, down in the UTC area, and I've had a number of friends over the years refer me that just say, Steve, you need to study spiral dynamics and integral theory. It's just your thing. But I never got into it. Until I went to Awaken as Love a couple weeks ago, and they introduced me to it, and I've just definitely I've just on Amazon getting the Future of Religion book just the day after, and so I'm just really charged to learn more about it because I really enjoy systems and about how people work, and I'm a healer, and so I'm just excited to be here.
Welcome aboard. You may want to start with a theory of everything.
Okay.
Anyone else? You see anyone? Michelle, can you say hi?
Hi there.
Good
to see
you.
everyone again. Yes. Yeah. Tom and I go way back to Alliant International University years and years and years ago when I was a student there, and I was introduced to integral theory, and then eventually asked to teach the courses there. And now, of course, I've moved on to the California Institute for Human Science, and most recently opened up a wellness center that focuses on integral theory, body, mind, spirit. So we still have office space, by the way, if anybody is looking.
Where are you? With healthy orange, I love it.
Where's your office, Michelle, if I may ask?
Sorry?
Where is your office that you have office space in? I didn't hear, sorry.
Encinitas.
Oh, okay, of course.
Big shock.
Maybe she could put in the chat for you.
Yeah.
Okay, does that look like everybody? Okay, so welcome everyone. We're going to introduce our illustrious speaker today, and Eloy has volunteered to do the duties.
I went to my document and forgot to unmute. Yeah, I'm excited to have Keith here with us at our gathering today. I followed Keith for many years. I've read all of his books. Well, counting the current one, which I'm still reading. I've read all his books. And Keith's teacher, Junpo Roshi, introduced me to a deep Buddhist practice called Mondo Zen. And it's a serious, disciplined practice. And through that, I heard about Keith. I saw Keith at an event in Boulder 13 years ago, where Junpo and I were in a circling group together. And both Junpo and Keith are badass dudes, each in their own way, but these are serious practitioners. Keith is a respected author of several books, a Zen teacher and an integral coach dedicated to probing deep existential questions and spiritual growth. His work blends Eastern spirituality with Western developmental psychology. And he's the biographer of Zen Master Junpo Dennis Kelly Roshi, Heart Blown Open. That was a fabulous book, amazing story. And that's among his many award-winning writings, reflecting a passion for personal transformation, social justice, and cultural progression. I'm going to add that he brings in his personal life, blends his personal life and his personal learnings, his love of motorcycles and traveling on cross country on motorcycles. So he's an ordained priest in this Hollow Bones Zen order. And he's got over 3 decades of practicing and teaching Chinese Northern Kung Fu and Qigong. And he earned the title of Sifu in 2015. So I'm delighted to have Keith here today, and I think you will be too. So take it away, Keith.
Wonderful. Thank you for that introduction. It's maybe a little too flattering, but thank you. I just want to start off first by thanking Eloy and thanking Kathy for welcoming me here and giving me the introduction and giving me an opportunity to speak and talk with you all. And I just want to express gratitude for my teachers, Junpo Dennis Kelly Roshi, without whom I wouldn't be here, and Ken Wilber, who's probably more than anyone except for my parents changed the course of my life. So just want to acknowledge the people who helped get me here. So yeah, Junpo was an interesting teacher. He's an interesting guy. He passed away 2 years ago. And he was the first Buddhist teacher that I encountered personally that was really interested in exploring this idea of awakening and shadow. And he was the first teacher I ever encountered that was willing to talk about the fact that he was a little bit screwed up himself, that he had trauma that was unresolved, that he was basically on a narcissism spectrum. He was severely abused as a child, and he really struggled with the fact that even though he spent 6 years in a monastery training very, 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 very traditional Rinzai Zen, when he came out, as he said, I was a complete fraud. I could rest in complete, total awakened mind, and none of my shadows have been transformed. And so I could go around my traumas, I could go around my reactivity, but I didn't understand them, and I never transformed them. And so, he really was the one that sort of brought me into this idea of Buddhism as something that really needs to be integrated with the wisdom and beauty of the West, with this powerful tool that we know that's called psychotherapy. And that's really, really been on a powerful, powerful progressive course over the last 20 years, especially. Junpo missed some of the really interesting stuff. So with all due respect to my teacher, I want to actually start with a story where I really fundamentally disagree with him. And he maintained, right up to his dying day, he maintained that awakening, that enlightenment, had the capacity to completely and totally transform the individual. So that if one was truly, fully awakened, then they were awakened, all their shadows were awakened, all their personas were awakened, all their trauma was awakened, all of these things were fully awakened, and they were essentially, there was nothing left in shadow. He really believed that. And after many years of sitting with it, practicing with it, exploring my own mind, the minds of my students, some other teachers, I've come to the conclusion that that idea is absolutely, totally wrong. It's very incorrect from a number of perspectives that I'll explore today. And I'll bring some things in that I don't talk about in my book and I don't talk about on my website, because I don't tend to speak to an integral audience. I try to use integral as my operating system. So I don't tend to get into integral jargon out in the normal world, but here I will a little bit more. So so before I get into all these sort of interesting tidbits, I want to give us sort of an overview, drive-by of shadow, psychological shadow. So in a nutshell, psychological shadow is anything in your conscious mind, anything in your consciousness that you can't see, right? So there's individual shadow and there's collective shadows. You know, we could talk about how the idea of systemic racism or systemic sexism really was a sort of a collective shadow in a bunch of different cultures. But for this talk, we're really going to stick with the idea of personal shadow. So personal shadow isn't something when I say like, oh gosh, you know, Eloy, I have a lot of money shadow. You know, I really struggle to blah, blah, blah. That's not really shadow because I sort of know it. I see it. So real shadow is something that is genuinely invisible to my conscious mind. And there's basically three kinds of shadows that we all have, and that require different kinds of shadow work to resolve. So the three kinds of shadows are pretty simple. The first one is called introjections, and introjections are when we say really bad things to ourselves. You know, you're not a good person, you're not worthy of love, what's wrong with you? Oh my God, you're such an idiot. Oh my God, you're so fat. Oh my God, you're so unlovable. You know, any of these things that sort of come in, that feel like they come in from the outside, those are introjects, and those are things that get put into us when we're little. They might get put into us by our culture, they might get put into us by our parents or our educators, but they are things that basically aren't us, that we internalize. So those are introjects. And introjects, you need a very specific kind of therapy to work with your introjects, which is basically you have to sort of excise them from the body mind. So you have to do the work of saying, oh, hey, mom, you know, oh, hey, dad, nice to see you again. Thanks for checking in. I'm actually going to let this one go and not focus on it. The second kind of shadow is splitting off. This is much more common, and usually people are more familiar with this. And splitting off happens when we're growing up and something traumatic tends to happen, and we will split off part of our psyche. And so most of you, I'm sure, have heard of things called like parts work, where we're working with maybe our inner child, or if you've ever worked with Genpo Roshi and done his big mind process, that's splitting into all kinds of selves, you know, the controller, the wounded inner child, the unwounded inner child, you know, the voice of desire, the voice of reason, blah, 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 right? So the idea is that as we grow up and differentiate and mature, in order to be psychologically sound and psychologically whole, we have to split off some parts of ourselves in order to protect the system. And an easy way to think of that, you think of like the sort of typical macho Western guy who can't cry, right? You know, it's like they're afraid to cry. Why are they afraid to cry? Well, they're afraid to cry because they're cut off from their inner child. Their inner child couldn't cry. I'm sorry, when they were children, they couldn't cry without being made fun of or humiliated or made to feel bad. And so their inner child gets walled off. And as adults, they're a bit calcified. You know, they can't access that rich emotionality of tears and vulnerability, right? So you go into your life and you're less whole than you could be from an ego consciousness perspective. The work of working with that, or working with split selves, is obviously there we want to own the split self. We want to integrate the split self. We want to do things like inner parenting and this kind of stuff. Take the voices and make them take the selves and bring them back to the table consciously. But the third kind, so we have introjects, we have splitting. The third kind is something that we see everywhere in society today. My favorite, which is projection. Everybody projects, right? Everybody projects. What happens with projection is very simple. It's some part of myself that I have walled off in my consciousness that I really hate, that I am very judgmental about. And when I see that out in the world, by my neighbor, by my wife, by my children, my dog, Donald Trump, Ken Wilber, right? Joe Biden, Boris Johnson, it doesn't matter, right? When I say, oh, that guy, I hate that thing, and blah, blah, blah. And projection is when we find intolerable and horrible when someone says something, and the reaction is like this. It's the closed fist, right? It's when Junpo would say it has a hook in you. When you're disgusted and revolted by it, as opposed to being like, oh, that's problematic, or that's something that needs to require attention. So the three types of shadows: introjects, projections, splitting off selves, all three require different kinds of therapeutic interventions in order to own. Since you guys are integralists, I will say one of the things that the research does show with projections, which is very interesting, it does appear that as the ego evolves, it gets better and better at catching projections, so that you can actually see projections in real time as they're coming out of your mouth and catch them and be like, oh, that's a projection. Let me check in with that. So that's just sort of an interesting aside. So that's sort of the overview there. Then the let's see. I'll go a little further, and then we'll take a quick pause here and maybe break into some groups. But so these three kinds of shadows get created in two ways. And the first way is trauma. I mentioned trauma. Trauma, if we're to define it simply, is something that happens to an individual that is beyond their control, and that they are unable to fully experience the event with all of their body mind. And so part of it gets walled off and stored and has to be integrated or not integrated later. We're most susceptible to trauma when we're children because we don't have a formed prefrontal cortex, so we can't regulate ourselves. We can't come into self-regulation, which is really the goal of all psychotherapy, to have me regulate myself rather than my wife regulate me, or the television regulate me, or a bottle of booze regulate me, or whatever, right? Self-regulation is sort of the goal of psychotherapy, the goal of individuation, the goal of psychological wholeness. And when we're traumatized and it's unresolved, we tend to have problems with anxiety, depression, personality disorders like obsessive compulsive disorder or substance abuse disorders. In essence, if we have unresolved trauma, it can be hard to be here now, to be present in our own lives. We want to get away from the moment. Obviously, trauma can happen as you're an adult, soldiers and things like that. But the research seems pretty clear that we're more susceptible to experiencing adult trauma if we have unresolved childhood trauma. And if we have done work around that, then we have more psychological resilience to be able to experience the ups and downs of life, even extreme things. So the other way that the three types of shadows are formed, one is trauma, and the other one is attachment disorders. And attachment disorders are really quite fascinating. These really came into popular consciousness sort of after Junpo was teaching. And I was quite really unpleasantly surprised when I began to hear about them, because I presume the way that I'm in the world, which is this sort of detached, sort of aloof guy. I'm an Enneagram 5, for those of you that know the Enneagram. And, I think people that know me would describe me as sort of distant, cool in the sense of, not warm, sort of cool temperature, a little aloof, a little detached. And I just thought that was, me being me. And as I began to explore attachment disorders, I began to realize that really I'm sort of like classically avoidantly attached. And avoidant attachment just means basically I don't really trust people. It's been a real problem that I've had to really work to integrate, which is presuming that people are dangerous unconsciously, right? So I want to create space. So there's avoidant attachment, there's anxious attachment, which is just a different form of it, which tends to be people that have a similar kind of wounding may end up really needing to be reassured a lot. So in conflict, they're going to really, am I okay? Am I okay? Am I okay? Hey, am I okay? They might do it in an inappropriate way. They might do it in a way that's overwhelming to the other person. And often if they're anxiously attached, the reassurance really isn't going to do a whole lot to actually soothe them, because what they need to do is self-soothe, and they haven't developed that capacity yet. And then the third kind of attachment disorder that we can have is what's called disorganized attachment. And that's when you have a little bit of both. So you may distrust the world in the way that an avoidant attachment person does. And you may also, when you go in to be soothed, have some of that anxious stuff in you as well. And so disorganized attachment people can have a really hard time with intimacy, because they, more than the other two, can tend to sort of give off very conflicting signals that can be very confusing to people. So that's just sort of a real broad overview of shadow, of trauma, and of attachment. And when we come back together, we'll get into Dr. Dan Brown's work a little bit and go a little further in this. But maybe this is a good time for us to take a pause, and we could have these questions that we'll discuss in groups. So I think Kathy's going to throw them into the chat so you don't have to remember them. But the first question that we will discuss is where do you see the three kinds of shadows in society at large? So the projections, introjects, splitting off. Where do you see the three kinds of shadows in your family or friends? Where do you see them in yourself? And then my favorite one, which is, if you're willing, to name your biggest projection into the world, if you can.
Keith, can you rename the three shadows again? We had somebody come in late, and it would help me too.
Yeah. So the three shadows are the three types of shadows are introjects, which is when we tell ourselves that, hey, you're a piece of crap, you'll never do it right, you're not lovable, what's wrong with you, blah blah blah. Splitting selves. So the idea, if I split off my inner child, and so I'm not in touch with my vulnerability, my care, my sensitivity, something like that. I mean, we may see that like in politicians or people, the celebrities, or we may even see it in cultural institutions. And then projection. And projections when I see something in the world that I can't stand, and I think it's horrible and wrong and effed up and all these things. And I'm unwilling to see that, like, oh, I have a little bit of that in me. I got a little Donald Trump in me that I can't stand.
And Namali put those in the chat, so.
Great.
Right. I just double checking to see whether anybody, we got put people in groups of 4 for 15 minutes. So we'll have a good time to question all of these. So let's ready to head out. I'll see you when you get back.
All right, are we all back? Good to go? Okay, great. So that was a lot. I gave a lot of information, so I hope everybody was willing to sort of follow along that. There's something that came up in our group that I want to sort of highlight a little bit, which is how do you tell if these shadows are sort of present? Like, how do we know? How do we know if I'm reacting as my inner rebel versus my more Keithness? Or how do I know if I'm projecting? How do I know if I'm introjecting? How do I know? How do I know? And the best way to tell this is that when we get curious about ourselves, and if we take up something like a contemplative or meditation practice, The main benefit we get is we slow down the mind, and we slow down things that seem to be very fast or instantaneous. And what we see as we go through our lives is we'll see places where we get triggered or we get contracted, right? And I go into a lot of detail this in the book, When the Buddha Needs Therapy, so I can really slow this down for the reader. But the idea is like, I'm living my life, something happens, and boom, I react. And I flow into reaction, and I do the thing I always do. It might not necessarily even be a bad thing, right? But it's like, but the idea is that in my system, there's a contraction that's caused by a trigger, that's caused by an inner attachment wound or an inner trauma that's unresolved. And I react rather than choose. And so the idea of this therapeutic work is that it lets me choose my compassionate response to what's happening in my world rather than react unconsciously. So that's sort of the big overview of this. And that's the benefit of psychotherapeutic work, if you're doing it right and working with someone that's good. So I want to now sort of take a slight shift here and move into what's going to be much more of a Zen understanding of awakening and much less of an integral understanding. And then I'm going to tie these two worlds together and explain why I think Junpo was wrong by what he said. So I have a really simple definition of this. So consciousness includes all of your ego, all of your personas, all of your attachments, all of your traumas. It could include all of your past lives, if that's your jam. Thoughts, feelings, beliefs, identities, structures, right? All that shit, right? It's consciousness includes the totality of the self, including all of the unconscious material, the collective unconscious, all of it. What makes consciousness consciousness is that it is always in relationship to something else. That's it. So anytime you're in relationship to something else, could be your neighbor, it could be your own thoughts, it could be your ideas about who you are as a person, it could be about your gender, it could be about the patriarchy, it could be about anything. That's your consciousness. When we study integral theory and we study developmental psychology, the idea is our consciousness is evolving to become more and more self-aware. We go from, whatever beige to, amber to orange to green to teal to turquoise, right? To indigo, this spectrum of consciousness evolving, becoming more self-aware, easier, more able to see its shadows, more able to see its projections, more able to really understand how it operates. But consciousness is nevertheless in relationship to something else, even if that something else is God itself, the Godhead itself, to the ancestor realm, to things that are incredibly subtle and divine and beautiful and heart-centered and opening and all those things. Very, very high, sophisticated kinds of consciousness, very, very low, unaware kinds of consciousness, all in relationship to something else. That's it. Awareness, I just look at my notes here. So awareness is different. Awareness is in relationship to nothing. Awareness is the seer, but it can't be seen. Awareness is always present. It's never been born. It will never die. We can't have awareness, right? The part of the problem with meditation is that a lot of practitioners try to get enlightenment or try to get spiritual insight for themselves. And this is a sort of fundamentally impossible task. The ego is dualistic. The consciousness is dualistic. It is always in relationship to something else, which means there's always me and something I'm experiencing, even in a very sophisticated way. Awareness is in relationship to nothing. And when we drop into the deepest parts of our practice and the deepest parts of our awareness, right, we don't awaken. Keith doesn't awaken. Junpo never awoke Ken Wilber's not awake. Adyashanti's not awake. These are very dangerously deceptive ideas. Awakening awakes. Awareness is aware. God is awake. There is no separation in pure awareness. Pure awareness looks out at the world as it's arising, everything that's in it, everything that's in it. War, rape, child sex trafficking, sunsets, babies' tears, all of it. Awareness looks out at the universe, including the self system, and sees it all arising in a very beautiful display of existence. No right, no wrong, nothing to do, nowhere to go, nothing to identify as. Right? This is what liberation is. This is what awakening is. Awareness as awareness. That's it. In relationship to nothing. So the great masters, the great teachers, this is part of what they're doing. They are residing as awareness. From awareness, you can watch the whole self system arise. It's including the traumas and the shadows and all these other sorts of things. The trouble that can happen is that if I'm residing as awareness, I am radically disidentified with my ego structures. If I'm a spiritual teacher, it means that if I'm spending most of my days sitting as awareness, I'm not going to see any problem with the screwed up parts of myself, because there isn't a problem from awareness. It's not a problem from awareness. Everything is as it is, and it can be no other way. Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche used to say, see the perfection. See the perfection. As he was doing blow and screwing his students and drank himself to death at 47 years old, you know? How do you explain that? How do you explain Trungpa drinking himself to death at 47 years old? He was powerfully awake, powerfully awake. He wasn't a fraud. He was deeply traumatized. He was deeply in shadow. He had deeply screwed up, split off selves, terrible introjects, projected like crazy, weird projections. He had a whole thing with cats, which you can look up on your own. How do we explain it? How do we explain it? Well, because as he sits as perfection, as he sits as awareness, and he looks, pardon my French, as he looks at the shitstorm of his ego, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter from that perspective. Shadow work has to be done by consciousness. Traumas, attachment disorders, all that stuff arises in consciousness, in ego, and you have to do the work through consciousness. And my contention is that this can be challenging for some of the great teachers out there because of the nature of their minds. That's one thing. That's the most generous reading of it that you could possibly have, you know, and I think that's important for some of the really awake teachers that I've encountered. There's less generous interpretations as well. And the less generous interpretations are that, you know, people can get really attached to their spiritual insights. So their egos get attached to it. So it's like, I have this great experience of oneness and unification. And what happens? Well, Keith is like, hey, that's pretty cool. I'm awake. I'm a spiritual teacher. I need to have students. And not only do I need to have students and to disseminate my wisdom, but I'm kind of entitled to do whatever I want with them, you know, because it's my show. And I'm not really aware of the fact that maybe my mom did this or my dad did that. And maybe I have some weird sexual shadows or weird power shadows. You know, I need to be in control, or I need to have sycophantic, you know, devotees that won't question me, or, you know, all these things that are sort of arising in the realm of shadow. And this is much more common. I think teachers that have spiritual insight that is deep and genuine, but they are not residing in a fully awakened space all the time. And there's a bit of a narcissistic unwillingness to look at what might be problematic in themselves. And at the end of the talk, I'm going to give five ways that I think we can actually address all these things and use it as individuals and as a community to hold ourselves and to hold our teachers accountable, so that we can actually come to something that's a little more intelligent and nuanced. Let our teachers off the hook and let ourselves off the hook as well.
Can I ask you a quick question, Keith?
Absolutely, yeah.
So someone residing in pure awareness,
Mhm.
you could see that the egoic functions of shadow they're going to bypass. Is this different than spiritual bypassing?
It's a great question. Yeah. Yes and no. I would say so. Let me find a quote from Junpo here that he describes spiritual bypassing in a way that's perfect. So as I said, he becomes a Zen Roshi in 1992. So he's the first lineage holder and Dharma heir of Edo Shimano Roshi. He's the very first one. He gets the gold ring in 1992, and he's vice abbot for like 6 months, and then he resigns. And he comes to Boulder and he starts doing shadow work. And so I was interviewing him for our second book, The Heart of Zen. And I said, what happened? And this is what he said. He said, because I was a fraud. There was nowhere to hide. In 1992, when recognized as a so-called Zen master, I had to face the fact that in my case, Zen was just not working effectively, not for me or for many others. I had insight, but I wasn't free. I had a lot of psychological damage from my upbringing, and Zen simply hadn't touched it. I could transcend it, true. That's what the bypassing is. I could transcend it, true. Control it with my will, but the damage was still intact and mostly untouched. I didn't know if that was just my problem or if that was something that was common in the larger Buddhist community. I saw with my 6 years in the monastery a lot of psychological shadows in myself, but also in the men and women training with me and other spiritual communities and in Edo Shimano himself. But how widespread it was and what it meant, I could only guess. How come? This was his fundamental question, and this is where the bypass actually happens. How come after decades of practice, real wisdom and compassion were not ruling my life, directing my behavior and transforming lust, anger, jealousy, and envy? How could love and compassion not hold in the face of my internal conflict? I could remain non-reactive in the face of these things, but it was a very repressive energy that was required, and my negative emotions still flourished, and they would sometimes overpower my discipline and my insight. Why? How? I had to know. So my contention and Junpo's contention is that the deeper you are on the awakening process, in integral terms, the more your state experiences are getting more and more sophisticated, gross, subtle, causal, non-dual, which I think is way too simplistic. But if we just allow those four, the trouble is when you get to causal and non-dual, they don't touch your shadows. They don't illuminate your shadows. As I just said, that's the realm of consciousness. That's not the realm of state. Even the realm of the witness, which I would maintain the witnessing stance is really a high form of consciousness. But it's also not very good at doing shadow work. So let me pause there. And I think we can do a second question here. And the second question for discussion would be, what is your understanding of consciousness versus awareness? So that's really the most important one. What's your understanding of consciousness versus awareness? And then how does this fit into the integral model of stages of consciousness versus states of consciousness, for those of you that are more integral nerds? So what's your understanding of consciousness versus awareness? That's the big one. Second one, how does this fit into the integral model of stages of consciousness versus states of consciousness? And I think maybe just 10 minutes for this one instead of 15, Kathy. So I'm just noticing the time. I want to make sure that I can get through to the end, and then we can have enough time for everybody to sort of, discuss this openly.
Yeah, I've adjusted the time to 10 minutes and respun the wheel so everybody's got different people in their room. So let's see where we are and see you back in 10 minutes.
All right, everybody.
That was a trip.
Just some light discussion for your Saturday, some, easy stuff, right? Okay, so this should be the shortest part. I just want to sort of bring it together, bring all these points together. Hopefully, and give us five ways to integrate sex, spirituality, and shadow that hopefully will be helpful. And then from here, we can sort of break into the big group. But I want to make a couple points before I go there. So the first point is that there's a really interesting phenomena that seems to be true. And just wait, I'm seeing the Mollies. Make sure everybody's in. Okay. To me, this is another caution for us about the awakening process. So you can only awaken what you can see. So as teachers sit, and they sit as awareness, and they can illuminate parts of their consciousness as they look at their consciousness from awareness. This has profound implications, right, for the human experience. But since this is San Diego Integral, I think it's really important to point out that what that means is that, and this is where I think Junpo was incorrect in a second way, which is that if you are Amber, if you're a Zen teacher living in 17th century Japan, which means you are fused with a lot of stuff from your consciousness, you can see rules and regulations, you can see that kind of stuff, but you can't see personas, you can't see shadows, you can't see systemic systems that are operating below the thing. You really can't even see cultural prejudice or things like xenophobia or anything like that that really exists. That comes, the capacity to see that becomes available at Orange. So if you're awakened, fully awakened at Amber, you can only see through rules. You can only see through Amber structures. You can't see through rationality. You can't see through personas. You can't see through shadows. You can't see through any of that stuff because they don't exist for you. So that's another way to where this idea of full awakening sort of falls apart, right? The same thing would be true if you have a deep awakening and you're Orange, or then you're still not going to be able to see things that are sort of systemic in nature. You're going to have a harder time seeing things like your own projections. That really comes online at Green. So part of the thing that's really interesting is that you can only see through your ego structure where that is. So awareness can only see through that. And so that's something that Terry O'Fallon in the Stages model gets more into. And I think Suzanne Cook-Reuter gets into that a little bit as well. But it has really interesting implications for integral theory and for developmental psychology, which will be a whole different call. So I want to note that. And then I just sort of want to come back to this idea, which sort of that reinforces, which is the idea that egos don't awaken. Egos don't awaken. Egos are informed and transformed by the awakening process, but they don't awaken. You will not awaken. Your teacher will not awaken. If they think they're awake, run. If you think you're awake, get help. You're not. You're not awake. So awakening is awake. When we hold on to it, we create spiritual bypassing, spiritual narcissism, spiritual inflation. We tend to become a not so good force in the world.
Let me jump in, Keith. How are you defining ego?
Consciousness. So as big or as small as you want.
Say more consciousness. Where does self come in?
Where does self come into consciousness?
The words ego, consciousness, and self. How do you talk about that?
So, I mean, for this discussion, I don't think it matters so much. I mean, I think there's a whole interesting discussion to be had around exploring the different facets of consciousness and how it understands itself, which, what is ego? What is self? What is, what are personas or whatever the stuff is? You could sort of put that into nested rushing dolls of greater or lesser awareness. The point is that awakening doesn't awaken the parts of the ego. The ego doesn't awaken because the ego, no matter how big or how small or how evolved, is inherently dualistic. It's inherently self and other. It's I want more, I want less, or I don't care. That's basically what egos do, no matter how sophisticated or how simple.
That just clarified it for myself and others.
Great, great. Thank you. So, you know, in Zen, there's a saying that you can't be awake and opinionated at the same time, which I love. You can't be awake and opinionated. It's such an affront to my ego. You can't be awake and opinionated. They're mutually exclusive states, like dead and alive, or sleep and awake, right? You can't be awake and opinionated. You can be awake and discerning. You can like chocolate ice cream more than vanilla, but it doesn't mean that vanilla is screwed up and wrong and shouldn't exist and all this other stuff. It's just you have a preference. Nothing wrong with preferences, and there's nothing wrong with discernments. There's nothing wrong with believing that maybe we need to do things for the good of this or that. You know, that's all okay, but it's not locked in. It's not locked into your opinion. I know what's right. So awake and opinionated, mutually exclusive. And it's the idea, I think it was Adyashanti who said this, but I love it because it shows, you know, the truths sort of come from all different quarters, but you know, you can't be special and enlightened. It's the same thing. The idea of specialness, being specially awake or specially spiritual, it doesn't make any sense if you're residing in awareness. And any teacher worth their salt will be able to transmit that and should be living that in a way that's really clear. So, okay, that was my sort of last little bit. So 5 ways to integrate sex, spirituality, and shadow. Okay, so here are my 5. And hopefully someone can write these down and put them in the chat so everybody can remember these, including me. So the first one is to understand and avoid spiritual bypassing. So, you know, we just went through this. I gave that quote about Junpo. So bypassing is really when we lean into our spiritual practice and we lean into spiritual states in order to get away from the pain that we're experiencing. So instead of doing shadow work, I do spiritual work, right? Rather than going to talk to a therapist about how I feel, I go and do ayahuasca and I have this great experience of connectivity with all of everything, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's not going to help you really get into those shadows in a way that you're going to do sober, disciplined, just the grit and grind of the work. So we need to use the ego to work on the ego. That's it. You can't work on your ego from awareness. You can't work on it in any way but ego to ego. That's the way it has to be done. So the first thing is understand and avoid spiritual bypassing. The second thing is tell the truth and demand the truth. It's really simple. So we make mistakes, our teachers make mistakes. If a teacher screws up, they should be willing to admit that they screwed up. They should tell the truth. Their community ideally won't have a problem with them being truthful because they've hopefully worked on this idea that the guru or the teacher has to be perfect. How boring, how awful. Would you really want to train with someone that didn't ever screw up or make mistakes? What would you ever learn? To me, it's not interesting at all. So we have to tell the truth when we screw up, and our teachers have to tell the truth, and we have to demand the truth. Demand the truth of ourselves, demand the truth of our teachers, and don't put up with their bullshit. You know, you guys are in the integral community. I'm not going to name names, but I'll say that there's been a lot of scandal around teachers that are affiliated with this community of various types. Some of the teachers handled it by owning the truth and stepping into it, and some of them didn't. They refuse to acknowledge it. They obfuscate, they hide, they demonize, they do things that are curiously unspiritual. So tell the truth, demand the truth. Third thing is awareness can awaken what it can't see. So I've talked about this. We talked about amber, orange, green. Awareness can awaken what it can't see. So you can awaken what's in shadow, period. No amount of spiritual insight is going to help you awaken something that you can't see. So if you don't know that you're avoidantly attached, that you have a wounded inner child, and that you have a real problem with authority and power, and they're unconscious, and you become deeply, deeply realized, those things just stay unconscious. And they come out sideways in the way I use Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche as an example. Alcoholism, womanizing, drug abuse, you know, awareness can awaken what it can't see. Okay. Fourth point is watch out for spiritual inflation. And so if you don't awaken and your spiritual identity is kind of in the way of actually getting what you want, then you can't be special and awake. You can't be opinionated and liberated. You can't hold on to your spiritual identity and rest in awakening. So these are things we just have to watch out for. There's no need to identify with awareness as awareness. You just a process of being. And the fifth and final point is it's up to you. So personal accountability. We all have to own the fact that we all have shadows, period. All teachers have shadows, period. So it's up to me to own the fact that I have shadows that are unresolved and to be humble enough and willing enough to look at them if somebody demands the truth of me. I need to be willing to do the same for anyone who's in a position of authority, teaching me, working with me, my coach, my spiritual teacher, doesn't matter, right? It's up to me to actually hold them accountable, not give up my autonomy, and to call out shadows when I see them. And to be humble to know that I might be projecting, right? So ultimately it's up to us. So 5 points, understand and avoid spiritual bypassing, tell the truth, demand the truth. Awareness can't awaken what it can't see. Watch out for spiritual inflation. It's up to us. It's up to you. And that's it. That's all I got. So I'll kick it back to the moderator. And yeah, I don't have anything else confirmed.
Do we have another breakout group, or do we do them all?
Just had the two.
Just have the two. So I got a question. I need a little bit more definition of spiritual inflation and the role it plays.
Yeah. Okay. Can you, in what capacity?
Well, as one of the ways I'm going to make sure I can integrate sex, spirituality, and shadow, how does spiritual inflation play a role?
So spiritual inflation tends to be when we begin to have legitimate and powerful experiences beyond self. And then the ego does what the ego always wants to do, is it wants to claim those experiences for itself and make it about me. And, you know, I'm sure everyone here who has a spiritual practice has noticed this very frustrating facet of reality, that you can't keep what you find on the spiritual path. You have the insight, and the insight, you are the insight. It's radically transformative. The insight appears to go away. And then what do we try to do? We try to grab it, and we suffer. And we go to teachers and we go, well, there was a time 2 years ago, this thing happened and I was in this place and blah, blah, blah. And they always say the same thing, which is that, you know, when do you think that happened? That's happening now, you know, come here, come now, right now. So we get wrapped up in this idea that if I'm a spiritual person, I've had spiritual experiences, that I need to keep having them in some particular kind of way, right? As opposed to just being with what is. Even if awareness is aware and everything is as it has to be, we can all relax, because even if that's true, it doesn't matter if we know it or not, it's still true. And so there's a tremendous relaxing in your practice of, it doesn't really matter if I get the joke or not. There's still a bit of a joke here, and I might be the butt of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I was thinking the role that staying humble would play in order to maintain some controls on that.
Yeah, and spiritual inflation is, again, that idea, you know, we see this, you know, I mean, again, you know, most of you have probably been in the world long enough to see some teachers that come in and begin teaching, you know, and my thing is I always look and see like, okay, like I can tell this person maybe is really intuiting something real and deep and powerful. But boy, are they identified with it. boy, this is when things get kind of culty, and where the teachers allow the sort of worship of them as the holder of the truth, right? That's the extreme version of it. But my thing is we all do it in some way. I mean, I do it in some way. That's part of my practice is to stop doing it. Oh, stop doing it. Oh, stop doing it. Oh, stop doing it. It's all the time, right? I'm the Zen guy, like look at me up here talking to everybody. I say, knock it off. You've probably made all kinds of mistakes in this talk tonight. Just take it easy and speak from your experience, speak from your heart, be humble, that kind of stuff.
You know what I love about the integral culture, like when you go to the big conferences, is the speakers and leaders hang out between the conference, formal conference, with everyone else. And it just seems like a grounding thing to do so that you don't end up that. And furthermore, I swear, Ken wearing that blonde wig today is a way of don't idealize me.
Yeah. The Andy Warhol look.
Yeah. So I saw Sally had her hand up.
Yeah, hi, Keith. Thanks very much for that.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Really enjoyed it. So much wisdom there, and I appreciate your experience. I do have a question for you particularly, because I read something you said the other day about, you said, in certain circumstances, it's okay for teachers to have sexual relationships with students.
Mm-hmm.
So I noticed that, and I wanted to ask you. So I come from various traditions, one of which is academia, orange, green. You know the boundaries. You never have sex with students. There's a power differential. You understand that, blah, blah. I also come from Taoist and Tantric lineages where the boundaries are really murky. And I come from integral where there have been serious abuse issues. So I would love you to justify that statement that you think it's okay for teachers to have sex with students.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would put a lot of qualifications on it. And the reason I made that qualification at the end of the essay that I'm sort of basing this talk on is I want to be clear that if someone is in a community and that community allows this behavior, that they have, say a very conscious attitude towards sexuality, that I don't personally have a problem with two consenting adults choosing to have sex. The problem that I have is when it's done in shadow. So if a teacher is sleeping with a student, they're honest with each other, the community knows, and the community is on board with that process because it doesn't violate any of their particular bylaws or whatever might be the case, I'm not against it in principle. That's all I mean by that. So I would never say a teacher should never sleep with a student under any circumstances. To me, that's absolutistic and absurd. And people are going to do it anyway. So it doesn't even make any difference.
So my question is that gives the teacher the authority to decide if the student is actually able to give consent. So my issue is I see a lot of codependence in these relationships. And so as a therapist, I look at particularly some women who agree to this. I don't see a lot of agency. And I think to give consent, you have to be aware of codependency and agency. And I don't see a lot of mostly male teachers understanding that. I think they take advantage. So you can give consent, but can you give consent until you fully agent it? And that relies on the teacher being discerning, and I don't see that.
Yeah, and I disagree. I agree with all that. I don't have any disagreement of any kind. And I think that's why it's up to each community. My only position is to make it absolutely wrong just perpetuates the shadow of it and pushes it into secrecy, and the behavior will go on then behind closed doors the way it always has, and people will still get hurt. So my invitation is for communities, if they decide they want to be consciously sexual in what the teachers are doing, that they come up with ways that the community is on board with it.
So what happens if in these communities, teachers make students sign non-disclosure agreements, which means they can never talk about what's going on?
Yeah, that's a big red flag, right? I mean, I can't imagine a bigger red flag than that. I've heard that in some of the Tibetan communities, the Rinpoches will say, hey, we're going to do this tantric practice, but you can't tell anyone. And it's like, nope, nope, nope. That's shadow. That's literally doing it in shadow.
I think that's a key piece. If they can't share it with the community or make a community knowledgeable, that's a big red flag, like you're saying, Keith.
Yep. Yeah. And I just have an eye. I was raised Roman Catholic. And so I have a sensitivity to the thou shalt not energy because it doesn't work, And so I would rather a community be screwing up and making mistakes in public with sexuality than doing it behind closed doors. And then it blows up and sideways the way we've all seen a million times. And nobody really learns much. And it just feels like a cycle that goes round and round.
So my new friend, Birgit Wittelbach has her hand up.
Thank you for the question.
Unmute myself, I see. Actually, I wanted to comment on the first one you said about, speeding down meditation practice. And I just love that idea because I'm meditating daily by brushing my teeth, and I didn't realize that I was meditating for 12 years that way. So I always kind of bypassed that Zen practice, but I did. Yeah, that was a comment. But I love that Sally mentioned I didn't know about the statement. So, but I would also like to comment on that one because this is much bigger issues, as you said. And I think talking in colors, in integral colors, like all these beige shadows are the deepest ones we have. So it's all about food, contact, and sexuality, which is like the first beige start off. And we have so much shadow, transgenerational and individual shadow on that. And I'm just want to thank you for this statement and how you describe it, because I feel the same. And yeah, so this is more like a comment on the first one, which tended to be a comment on Sally's, because this is just what we have to realize to get like real stable beige into us. Because, in second tier, the beige will, to have a proper yellow, we need to integrate the beige properly. And otherwise we can't go into turquoise. There is just no way. The integrating of the beige is the most important one, with a basis of unconditional love and setting boundaries, acknowledging needs, communication skills. That's the basis of it. But then we need to deal with that. We need to deal with polyamory. We need to deal with sexuality. We need to deal with all the crime between and beyond that. So that's what I would have liked to comment on that.
Great, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and shadow gets fascinating. It's like, I've been doing shadow work a long time and really pretty deeply. And, it seems that the research anecdotally and more now in the literature is showing that, we can be raised in pretty loving and whole households, but if our parents were deeply traumatized and never did their shadow work, that a lot of that wounding can actually get into the child, through epigenetics, through unspoken fears, through who knows, harmonics, energy, I don't know, it doesn't really matter, but that seems more and more the case. And so it's, yeah, to me, it's just a beautiful invitation again to be humble and to presume that there's things happening in my psyche that are not my choice.
Christopher, unmute yourself.
All right, thank you, Keith. I enjoyed the talk, and I just wanted to share. This is a little embarrassing, but I just had an aha moment in the discussion about shadow and sexuality, and that that aha moment is that, oh, with transparency, there's not a lot of room for shadow to take hold. It seems kind of obvious, and I don't know why that just stuck out to me right now. So I appreciate that, and I'm also just curious too about how does like the golden shadow, the so-called like positive things that how does transparency, how does that play out? I don't know. This is all just
Same
kind
way.
of happening in the moment, but
Exact same way, right? So owning the golden shadow is only the teacher's not quite human. They're so superhuman that we can never be like them. That's the golden projection of they have it all. And that needs to be owned and integrated as well.
and so is there an element of, if I'm trying to own my own good stuff, like is that like I'm trying to think of how I might disown my own positivity, my own, strengths. Does that look like being ashamed of taking center stage? So I,
Could be.
hide, yeah, I'm just, I guess, doing a lot of processing in the moment, but.
Yeah, it could be, but golden shadows usually are like, you look at someone, you think, my God, look at them. Look, they're so brilliant. Look at Ken. God, he's just such an incredible genius. He sees so, he's so awake. He's so this and this, and it's like that's a lot of golden projection. And, I would, if I was working with someone, say, well, where do you have some of those qualities? Let's take a little of that back and see where some of those things might be true for you.
What about splitting? How would that look?
The splitting with that, it might be just sort of splitting off the potentiality that you could be someone as accomplished, as smart, as brilliant, as popular, as whatever all it might be. So that potentiality is cut off and disowned. Great. And then projected out, right?
Right. Thank you.
I was wondering, you had ran through attachment disorders, being disorganized, anxious, and avoidant. But then there's secure attachment.
There is secure attachment. I skipped that one. Yeah.
And how much shadow do we need to make conscious in order to show up securely?
Yeah, it's interesting. So there's, that gets into Dr. Dan Brown's work and sort of cutting edge attachment theory. Attachment theory is really fascinating. Let me find my notes here because I don't have it memorized. So, Dr. Dan Brown, who passed away a year ago, give or take, was a brilliant and gifted, he taught Mahamudra and Dzogchen at the request of the Dalai Lama, Harvard PhD, just a brilliant mind. So, and I don't know if this is his theory or if he was bringing this from someone else, but I heard it from him, so I'll give him credit. He said for secure attachment, we need 5 things. And, we either need them as a child, or if we're an adult, we need these 5 things in our current relationship if I'm going to be securely attached to someone I'm intimate with, a friend, a lover, a wife, a husband, or whatever. First one, obviously, is safety and protection, right? You got to be safe, you got to be protected, you got to know that's true. Second one is attunement. So that a parent or caregiver notices what you're feeling and thinking, and they're accurate in what they're guessing. And they're like, oh, honey, you seem upset. Third one is they help to regulate your nervous system. So when you're upset as a little kid, you come in and you're crying, the parent, drops to a knee and they go, come here. And they use their bigger adult nervous system to regulate the child's nervous system. You see this all the time in the animal kingdom, especially with the more evolved mammals. This is one we don't often get in the West. This is usually where most people have an issue with their attachment bonding, is feeling parents' joy at your existence. Something that's much more common in indigenous and sort of close to the earth societies. The idea that just the fact that you exist and you were born brings them joy, and that joy is spontaneously expressed sort of quite a bit growing up. Parents aren't too busy. They're like, oh my God, this kid is just driving me crazy, right? And then the 5th one is allowing exploration, being trusted to explore the world. The sort of anti-helicopter parent that, like, I trust the kid to go out and learn things. So those 5 things, according to Dan Brown: safety and protection, being attuned to, having your nervous system regulated, feeling joy at your existence, and being trusted or allowing exploration. Those things are true for healthy childhood attachment. And those things are necessary if we're in a securely attached adult relationship. We will have those 5 things: safety, attunement, help in regulating our nervous system, joy at the fact that we're in the relationship, and trust.
Christine, do you still have your question about the awareness and transcendence?
Yeah, I was wondering, Keith, if you can clarify, can they be used interchangeably? Awakening is a process, is transcendence the destination, or can we use them interchangeably?
So there is no destination, right? So in Zen, we like to say it's the gateless gate, and it sounds like clever Zen double talk. But the idea is when we reside as awakening, when we really reside here fully, we see that there's nowhere to be but here. There's nowhere to go. There's nothing to get. There is no such thing as spiritual realization. That's all part of the ego game. And I would say Zen is maybe especially good at blowing up maps.
And Zen can show up as spiritual bypassing.
Oh my God, can it ever? Like one of the worst ones ever. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Well said.
Well, this is one of the points that Ken Wilber's made that has helped me very much, is that all of the traditional contemplative techniques were consolidated during the pre-modern times, Christian, Indian, all of them, and therefore none of them see shadow, and none of them are really equipped to deal with it. And so for those of us who have adopted these practices, finding out about stuff like what you've been doing with Genpo has been such a relief and such an opening. And I can say for myself that I worked with Guru Yoga. My guru was a very deep amber guy from deepest India, and being able to read Ken Wilber all along helped me deal with the dark side of Guru Yoga while getting the benefits. So beautiful. I think hooray, 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 hooray for the work that you're doing. It's so needed. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much. And that's just a great commentary. If you are informed when you're working with a spiritual teacher who isn't as well informed with you, but does have deep insight, you can learn a tremendous amount. You can really, because sort of where and how to surrender, and where and how to be a little more skeptical and discerning. So that's just a beautiful reflection.
And that's what Ken Wilber did for me. And my guru, he could transmit extremely deep experiences just by the eye contact or just by willing it. And it was his gift to open me to some of these wonderful experiences. But then when he would say, we must surrender completely to the guru, literally word for word, everything. And I saw the people around me taking it literally. Fortunately, my guru was basically an ethical man, and the real serious problems did not emerge until his successor. The guru left the body, and his successor started living out some of the what latent shadows came into full blossom under the successor, and I left. But I've seen so many of my very dear spiritual brothers and sisters be trapped. It's like in this cult that's growing more and more negative. And so if I hadn't had Ken Wilber's work to rely on, I could be in there with them. So
beautiful.
Yeah, this is work that's so needed now, and it's exciting, because what you said, I just read your book. It's exciting what you said, that I think it was your teacher who said that Zen doesn't work, psychotherapy doesn't work, but when you do them together, they work.
Exactly.
Now that we know that, we can take the best of both, and we've really got something.
Yep. But I see we have 2 hands up. I'll tell you a funny Junpo story. One of my favorite ones. But I went out. We were working on, I think it was his memoir, so it would have been 2010 or so. And I'm in Wisconsin. He picked me up from the airport. It's like 11 p.m. at night, and we're driving back to his house. And I said, Junpo, I'm coming out here to meet with you. And so many of my friends are like, oh my God, you're the one-on-one with the Roshi, and it must be so spectacular, and you're so lucky. And I said, how do you deal with that kind of golden projection all the time? And he's driving. And so I could sort of see him illuminated. He's driving. And he turned to me and he said, well, that's easy. I just keep fucking up. And it was so Junpo, like completely honest.
So Olaf and Eloy, I don't know who had their hand up first.
Let's let Olaf go first because it's the middle of the night for him.
Okay, thanks. I know exactly how to phrase this, but I noticed when I was in my early teens, my dad started talking about Buddhism and the idea of no self, and the self should die, maybe inside this, and that was quite. It sounded fascinating, but this was quite tricky to go through the Philippines with that in my mind. And I noted at a conference a few weeks ago that I really don't want non-dual pointers in my mind when I don't allow them. And just have practiced now kind of be a person, be an individual. And that's very interesting and subtle how to balance that with the with the non-duality too. I mean, the good part of it. Do you have any comment on that?
The only thing I would say is that, I think we always have to be careful that we don't make the ego the enemy. That, man, I work with so many people that, they say some version of, well, I'm just in the way, my mind is so busy. I can't concentrate enough, and I need to how do I get rid of this part of myself? And boy, that just doesn't work. Ego fighting the ego just creates war. And so my advice to people is always, you'll never get rid of your ego. You'll never get rid of yourself until you die. Spiritual teachers have big selves. I don't know if you guys have noticed that. But you become less attached to the self. And when you become less attached to the self can be liberated to be itself in a lot of ways, which is to me part of what the beauty of like Chogyam Trungpa was he was free to be the hot mess that he was. He didn't care, he was unattached. He didn't care, maybe isn't quite right. I would say he was unattached. So we always want to make sure that when we're in our spiritual practice, that we are loving and kind and compassionate to ourselves. Because if we're not doing that to ourselves, who's going to do it?
Yeah, cool. I mean, I group with Tim Freak right now, who changed his way of teaching and embraces the person.
Absolutely. As opposed to what, right?
Yeah, exactly. That war.
Yeah. I'm terrible. It's kind of gets into the sort of bad Christianity things, the self-flogging and stuff,
Exactly. Oh, thanks.
Thank you.
Eloy.
Yeah, so I want to tie a few things together. So Junpo in his early life was a LSD manufacturer. And these days we're seeing a lot of psychedelic therapy. And psychedelics are also known for consciousness raising, consciousness expansion. It feels like it's an intersection. And I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Very happily, yeah. God, I wish Junpo had lived to see what was going on now. Yeah. I mean, it really breaks my heart because he was convinced with every fiber of his being that it was LSD and the revolution of the 1960s that began in the States and then really spread throughout the world that opened a collective portal to the possibility of Eastern style awakening and enlightenment becoming a potential writ large in the West. So for him, without LSD, we wouldn't all be sitting here talking about this. Hard stop. That was his absolute conviction. And, he struggled with how candid he was willing to be about how necessary hallucinogenics were as a tool on the path of awakening. And I think I can tell this story now because Junpo's dead. So one of the things he would do secretly when he was working with people, if you were close to him and you were strolling in your meditation, he would give you a little bit of LSD, like a quarter dose. Right? You're there, you're on a retreat, and you're just, God damn it, you're just miserable. You're in the Zen retreat. You can't move, you can't talk to anybody. Food sucks, you're up at 4 a.m. and it's just miserable. And you're sitting there and you're just wrestling with all of you. And he'd be like, here's a little bit of LSD, just a quarter dose. And people would, and the whole ego would relax. And it wasn't meant to be a bypass or shortcut, but to simply show the ego that it could relax and open, and it would be a great tool for some people to realize, why are you meditating in the first place? It would help give them the insight. And now there's all this research showing us how powerful psilocybin, LSD, MDMA, ketamine, we're in a renaissance of understanding the brain and how these things are related to both psychological health, understanding shadows, integrating shadows, and not yet, but I think the next stage is going to be how they can be helpful in the awakening process. He went to jail, for LSD, to a federal penitentiary. So he was very reluctant to talk about it publicly after that, understandably.
Most of us use wine or marijuana to open up some of it. Other questions, comments?
Oh, I had one more thought on that. And well, an interjection, I guess, or something. I've been hearing a lot about the psychologization of psychedelics. So, traditionally it's meant as a spiritual, sacred journeying tool. And the opening up now is through psychology. So there's that upside of the psychology making it more widely available, but then there's the doing it all with the approach of, it has to solve this problem, where we have to give you a DSM before we can, a diagnosis before we can treat you, and it has to work on that diagnosis. And anyway, it's kind of an interesting, they're meeting together for the benefit, and then there's always leverage from the psychology side.
Yeah, and I think it's because the MAPS program is doing it, being very smart. They're moving very slowly and very carefully, so that it doesn't get put back in the black box again. I know some people out here, Colorado is sort of a hotbed for the MAPS community, and I know quite a few practitioners, psychiatrists, two psychiatrists, and a ton of therapists that work therapeutically with ketamine, with MDMA, with psilocybin, and the results are heartbreakingly astounding. It's just beautiful. It's beautiful to be in a community that's doing this kind of work.
I will propose that we'll have a little close, and then we can maybe go into have more. I see Senia has a raised hand, and we can maybe bring that up during our open back and forth discussion, which is not meant to be a Q&A, but we'll get Tom to close us out and bring us so that we can, for people that do need to leave at 6 o'clock, that can happen.
And can I just make one more sort of closing comment here on them? So the other thing I would say too is that a big part of my work and my life is to live what I am talking about. So in the book, When the Buddha Needs Therapy, in that book, I make a point to talk about my childhood, my shadows, places that I've screwed up in really embarrassing ways, and a whole dark night of the self that I went through in the process of writing the book. really difficult things to talk about. I'm not totally comfortable putting them out in the world, but it felt really important that I not pretend that I'm ever sitting up here with my shit figured out. Seems really important. So I just want to end with that note that it's yeah, to me, really, this idea of humility is really paramount.
And I put your link in the chat, your website link in the chat.
Thanks.
So thank you very much, Keith.
My
You
pleasure.
gave us a lot to think about and integrate. So Eloy, you put his information there, and any other information to either contact you or get your book?
Everything can be done through my website. So yeah, that's great. And if anybody has a question, please reach out. I always respond to everybody that reaches out to me. So if you have a follow-up question or you want to start a thread about something, just use the website, send me an email, and I'll take it from there.
Great. So before we get into the chat, I just want to do a quick reminder that July 8th, we're going to have Luke Healy, Integral Prayers, Participatory Prayer for Transformation and Divine Becoming. And that's coming through the Shara link. And the name of her church is Unitary and what?
Shara is one of the, Shara referred Luke Healy, and she is one of the 3 ministers at Unity of Tuster.
Yeah.
And Luke started a group called Integral Christian Network. They do a lot of whole body awareness work.
Okay, so thank you. That's next month. Please RSVP. It gives us an idea what to expect. Today we got a pretty darn good turnout. And remember, we're open to donations, and we are ready to segue into the chat. And I thought I'd give you a very, very loose synthesis of what I heard today as I played host today. What struck me is how East is meeting West, and the two are coming together. And I'm always struck practicing in Orange County that there's yoga studios all over the place, and a county named after their center of gravity, Orange. But this is the evolutionary impulse. Is what I'm getting is Buddhism offered the awakening, but they failed to clean up. Whereas psychology offered consciousness, but the scope was so limited. I remember as a student asking, is catharsis out of analytic theory the only thing we had? Because there was no developmental spectrum of highest states and stages. So I love this discussion as we true up our models and try to think through them, and some of the pre-trans fallacies in both camps, empiricism and psychology, and that enlightenment will never be enough. That it seems to me that we're going to go from moving between awareness and witnessing and shadow work. That at one moment we're going to be at our higher self, and other times we're going to drop into shadow work and clean up as we become more integral, despite what the Zen's tradition says that it's always here. I believe them, but I can't always access it. So those are just my thoughts on synthesizing everything said today. And if I'm way in left field, please say something different.
And the floor is open.
And the floor is open.
And I just want to note, I need to duck out in about 10 minutes. So when I do, I will quietly vanish. But
Oh, yeah.
10 minutes. So I'm here for a little bit longer.
Okay.
Okay, well, if you have anything to contribute before you go, Keith, go for it.
I think I've talked enough. Let me give up the floor for a little bit.
Or any questions, I guess. I know we want to go into discussion, but since Keith's still here, or a discussion with Keith.
Well, I'll just pop in with something. I was chuckling when I read your book, and as I listened to your description, your definition of awareness and consciousness and the distinction. And I was chuckling because I've kind of worked over the years and decades, I've worked out my own elaborate thought structure on how everything fits together. And I have used the exact opposite definitions of you. And I mean, it's no problem to just to translate when I'm listening with you and talking with this group. It's easy. But this brings up something that I've harangued Nomali about a couple of times. I'm sorry, Nomali, if I've been obnoxious, but there is no standardization of vocabulary across the contemplative disciplines of the world. And that we see, we kind of had to stop and kind of review that 2-3 times during this conversation. And one thing I would love to see is, like the biologists had to do at some point, a century and a half ago, the biologists from all over the world got together and decided exactly what we mean by this word and that word. And geologists had to do the same thing. I think those of us in these contemplative and spiritual and integral communities, at some point, it's going to become absolutely necessary to have some kind of international conference and decide what terms we're going to use for what, so that we can continue talking to each other fruitfully. And I see, Larry, are you shaking your head? Feel free to pop in. But I'd love to see this happen in the circles around Ken Wilber. If somebody knows of some group that's already tackling it, I'd love to know about it. But I think this is a piece of work that we're going to have to do at some point in the foreseeable future. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
I think there's a place for that to an extent. The problem is if we start to codify, this is what awareness means, this is what consciousness means, because these are such, they're mental constructs that are trying to label things that are so ephemeral or ambiguous, for lack of better words. And to start to codify this stuff doesn't leave room then, given the nature of this ambiguity, this frothiness, it doesn't leave much room for people that maybe get new insights into all of it and how to contribute it. I see the plus side of it. I also see the negative side of it. Because as I've listened to Keith, he was using awareness and consciousness kind of in the reverse order that I do functionally. But once I got that, I was okay. And he was talking about the ego. For me, ego is a good thing. It's just my sense of self. And as my ego grows, that in terms of getting bigger, but in terms of getting more expansive, I include other selves in the universe as part of myself. So ego and self are healthy, functional things as long as I'm in a body. And as long as, if I try to hang out in the isness, as I talked about in one of my breakouts, there's no language, there's no symbology, there's no duality in the isness, and it's just not a functional thing to stay in while I'm in this body. So to be able to go in and out of those, though, I think is key, to not put one on a pedestal at the expense of the other, because as long as I'm in a body, I keep waking up with the darn thing every morning. It's always with me. And so to be able to be functional in it is so important. And yeah, enough said.
Here. That's very well said. Yeah.
Yes. Agreed. And that ought to be a very clear awareness, consciousness going into any such project, exactly as you've defined it, Larry.
And just to say a little more on what you just said, Karen, is what I see is very confusing for everybody in this non-standardization is it even seems like an in thing to name something differently. So that's just, when I'm starting to hear that, I always go, oh, can't we just use the same language? Yes. It's my profession and I get confused. I hate to be somebody else. Like, I would love it to be like biology, because sometimes we're all talking about the same thing and we use all these different words for it. And we do it on purpose. Like, I'm teaching NLP. Well, I'm teaching EMDR, when it's really, like, I don't want us to make more money because we name the same thing a different name. Because acting like we invented it or something. Yeah. And I understand there could be, we don't want to get Nazi-ish about it, or it's too structured, or, yeah.
As much as I'm wanting to agree with Karen into some kind of codifying of the terminology, there's a beauty and utility in, for example, with Keith and I, for my exploring, well, what do you mean by self? What do you mean by ego? It opens up possibility for meaning making to come in that maybe isn't going to be there if we're already latched into some codified expression of, well, this means this means this means this. It tends to get locked down, and there's utility in that, for sure, as long as we're functioning in language, which we're doing. But there's also utility in my asking Keith, oh, well, what do you mean by that? Or, oh, this is what I meant. And he asked me, oh, you mean that? And that going back and forth, that we find each other. There's actually a joy in that for me, in finding somebody instead of just assuming I know what they're talking about, because it's codified.
Yeah, and I think it can be helped developmentally as well, because we can sort of see how we might be holding that definition. Am I holding that definition loosely, or am I holding it in an absolute way? If we're talking about God, it's like, well, what do you mean by God, Larry? Like, tell me. I'm genuinely curious. What does that mean to you? Well, it's the one and true book. That's what it means. Oh, interesting. That's a very interesting definition. I'm glad we got that cleared up.
Yeah, I feel like if there's clear definitions for things, then people feel like, well, going to a place where I understand that is my goal. And then people start feeling like there's a direction to all this, whereas it's like, it seems like more free form. I think we said, like, yeah, things are not that concrete. And by asking the questions and having the discussions and feeling like you're exploring. But on the other hand, I'm also feeling like if there's people tend to have these experiences and then they think they're special for it. And then if they find out that though there's these stages, then you don't feel so special. Like you feel everybody's that there's this route that you go to, and they're like, oh no, I'm different. So it's to come up with definitions for things, you'd have to get over that feeling of specialness and uniqueness. So there's like a both wayness, that like there's not a specific target we're shooting for. And yeah, the things that happen to me are things that happen to a lot of people. So I'm not that special. So there's all that going on.
So despite the definition problem, which eventually needs to be trued up, like Keith, when you were describing the 5 ways to integrate sex, spirituality, and shadow, all of it felt so foundational in order to do we space, because there's a level of cleaning up in order to show up there. And it's interesting that it feels like it's beginning to merge more. That is, each of us works in our area and we begin to operationalize what we're actually doing, that I do see the consensus forming up a little bit. And sometimes that can happen prematurely, and then you end up with dogma. It doesn't have an aliveness. So I'm just heartened to see that we're kind of talking about the same stuff in some ways.
So maybe what we need is like a wiki or a Wikipedia, where it's a reference, but it's also an open, ongoing discussion. And this is part of how I understand the distinction between second tier and first tier, is that we who are putatively at second tier or aspiring understand that our understanding is always incomplete, and we remind ourselves to remain open to changing our minds about something if we have an expansion of understanding. So it would be like an ongoing project, but still some reference some common reference. I think we can yin this yang somehow.
Have got to run, guys. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Keith.
Thank you. Thank you.
I heard that giggle, Jesse, from down under.
Thank you.
Right, how to have this discussion about the with words without having the discussion about words be the only discussion you have.
Well,
Yeah, you gotta make sure you understand each other.
Yeah, the other thing is that it's more than words. So there's, our intention, what's in our hearts, the way we live, and all the stuff that we transmit that when we're having a conversation as well. So it's not just about words. If I'm talking about something and I've lived it, then that might be more available to somebody than if I just give them a flat definition.
Oh, absolutely. If we're embodying what we're talking about, it's not just the words anymore.
Just a little thing that Keith said that really lit me up was that point that like the 5 things to be able to have secure attachments, the feeling a parent's joy at your existence. And it got me thinking, like, what's the work, I need to do, we all need to do around that. And I'm feeling that having joy be something we're all fully wanting to have and feeling good about having and aiming for is also something in Western culture that we could use a lot more of, is like feeling all these things, including joy at our own existence, and joy at just joy during the day, and welcoming it, and finding ways to get it back when we lose it. Things like that is something I've kind of noticed maybe over the last couple of months to help that it's there.
It brings to mind, like when I saw Keith laughing on his way out, this idea of the cosmic joke. We live these lives so seriously about all of the stuff, making meaning, making a living, making relationships, and we're gifted this whole thing, and it's just I don't know how to explain it as a cosmic, but it's just it's a funny existence. It's almost laughable in that regard.
Yeah, one of the things I like to joke with my friends is that God has a wicked sense of humor and the joke's always on us. So we might as well laugh.
Going back to what Kathy said about joy, doing a lot of family therapy, the 50s parents were much more stoic, and then the pendulum swung to more joy and adoration, all the way to narcissistic kids, until it kind of settles back and we blend authority with support and love. So the evolutionary process is even changing in our time frame. It's amazing how much, at least in Orange County, how much enmeshment and indulgence I have to deal with. And that can be damaging.
Thanks, Tom. I was just trying to figure out how to say that. You said it nicely, because I'm thinking of my parents. I can't say, with maybe a couple small exceptions, of them feeling joyful that I was alive. Not that they were upset that I was alive, but it's just not kind of that neutral thing, that stoic, you're alive, so no big deal. And yeah, with helicopter parents and whatnot with their kids, you're special, you're just wonderful, just the way you are, and blah, 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 whatever. It's really changing. And as I shared with you, Tom, a couple months ago, one of my best memories in life was when I was 12 years old on the football team. And it was a rainy, muddy day, and I was a halfback. I got the ball and running around the right side. I'm about 10 yards down the field, slipping and sliding. It's muddy. People having a hard time standing up. And I was able to keep pushing off tackles. I had really good balance back then. But what I remember was my teammates kept yelling, "Go, Larry, go, Larry, go, Larry, go, Larry." And that always stuck with me. And it's something I think I didn't get enough of, for sure, from my parents. And I would love to have more of that even today, in this era of my life. And I'm wondering how many people here had parents that you could experience their joyfulness in you being alive.
Show of hands.
Yeah, my mom, I guess the way she talks about it now, it sounds like she had just had this task to do to raise these 3 kids. It's not like she was unhappy, but yeah, I really noticed that. Yeah, I think I was in Patricia Elber's community, and then she was talking about that feeling that her mother, who was German or something, passed on to her. And it took me a while. And then like a year later or something, I said to my a younger daughter that I was just expressing joy at her existence. And I feel like that was just felt so groundbreaking for everything about the family and relationships.
It's
like
interesting, the
something
holes.
new that hadn't been there genetically.
The holes can be the other way. Like I had teenage parents, so there's lots of joy, but like safety was goddamn, out of the question. And my mother liked white Cadillac convertibles, and she'd crash them, and like they were teenagers. And she'd get mad at my father and throw the adding machine out the 3rd story window. She was also Italian, Sicilian. So safety, but lots of joy, like, oh wow, you're in my life, nothing could be better than you being in my life. And so it's just interesting, the holes can be wherever they are. And whenever I can make safety, I notice also what you were just saying, Kathy, it always feels giant when I can make safety. Like if I book a hotel before I actually land someplace, I've only done that once in my life, and I travel extensively. But when I do manage to do it, I feel so proud of myself. And it's such a beautiful, I pass the multi-generational conditioning.
That's funny that like you don't have, like, we're not having reactivity about it, but it's like just seeing where it's there and kind of like feeling joy about these new things we're bringing into our lives. Like, oh yes, I made a hotel reservation. Woo! Other people just wouldn't get it.
No, they don't. They don't get it at all yet. That's true.
Bye, Olaf. Bye, Wheaton.
So to follow up on my issue of joyless parents, for me, something that was born out of extensive years of meditation for hours a day was finding that place, call it in the universe or wherever it is, that it's not so much that I experienced a joy for Larry being here. It was this unconditional being pleased, being something, I don't know what the words are. It's like, it's ineffable for my being here on the planet. And it's what has sustained me very significantly in wanting to stay on the planet.
Yeah, what strikes me when you say that, Larry, is even touching the divine at times was psychoactive enough to bridge the absence developmentally. And that speaks to, his whole thing about attachment theory. Attachment theory is closely aligned with object relations theory. And object relations is supposed to happen in the first year of life. That can you really connect mom as a being while you hold yourself? If you can't, you end up with a personality disorder. And then attachment theory goes a little longer into the developmental phase. But what strikes me with Integral, it really has the opportunity to articulate even better life practices down the road. like how we show up considering all 4 quadrants. I mean, that's a hell of an articulation. And it adds to where we go from here. So that's what I love about Integral, because I know how it changed the therapy. I was trained both psychoanalytic and systemic. But then when I had the Integral, I had all the way up starting. So we got a lot to offer because we're really thinking about it and practicing it at the same time.
Yep.
Agreed.
It's a long journey. Journey never ends, and that's not good or bad. It just is what it is, and here we are.
Bye, Jesse. Bright and early in the morning for her.
And late at night for Olaf.
Yeah,
What troopers?
Sweden.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah, here we are, and it's amazing. I was just, as you said that, I was just, here we are, virtually on Zoom. I mean, the miracles of modern technology that we can be together. I mean, I totally 1,000% agree. Integral has so much to offer, potentially, and a lot of really good and smart and dedicated people are working very hard to turn that potential into actual in the world which needs it. And and I'm actually, I'm just going to riff a little bit because we're just hanging out, but I look at these little boxes and we've got how many, 10 now. And I'm thinking of Jung when he had his near-death experience. He had a heart attack and he was out of the body and in the body and out of the body. And he talks about it in his memoirs, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, which I highly recommend. But he would be out of his body and having these incredible transcendent experiences that he describes. And then he would come back into his body in the early morning. So he'd like spend 12 hours out of his body and then 12 hours in his body over a period of a couple of weeks, if I recall correctly. And when it was time for him to leave these transcendent experiences and go back, he would go, oh no, now I have to go back into the box system again. And he said it was really like having to go back into his physical body, having been in a place that was beyond dimensions and beyond time and beyond space and so expansive. And then to come back into this physical body, into the physical world with space and time, it was like everybody was in this little box, suspended in these little boxes that didn't really touch each other. And so I think of that sometimes and I kind of chuckle when I'm looking at the Zoom screen with you folks and others, and I see we're all in our little boxes. But what a miracle that we can come together in this way and have these meetings.
I was thinking about Integral succeeded in naming the different levels of state.
Yes.
Whereas my impression of Jung was he was having, deep, subtle or non-dual state experiences and then coming back into the gross realm.
Yes.
And it is such a gift to be able to language it, because then the complexity builds on that.
Yes.
Although actually I want to say, like, while we're together, while we're talking about boxes, is beyond the leadership team, but getting information from other people about when do other people that are here at this meeting feel ready to like have a hybrid meeting again at Tom, and then maybe I'd offer to be a hybrid location for anybody that happens to be in Orange County, which actually there seems to be none, but hopefully, I don't know, we keep hoping we can grow one, because it's not like there's anything different about Integral in San Diego, but like Mike and a couple people that are in San Diego County, what's your vote about whether you'd be willing to drive? Oh, Jennifer, yay.
I'd be willing to drive back up to Tom's. Not to presume Tom and Christine would want to be hosting these. Christine does a lot of work to do these.
That's when I was slowing it down, is we're not ready technologically to pull this off.
But just to get the momentum, because I think, Tom, you said there's some people here that could donate and make it easy for us. I think we got to feel like we want to do it and speak up.
Well, to be practical.
And say what amount of money it would take for us to get the technology, or does anybody have the tech and donate it?
So that would be my next question practically, is what would it take technologically and how much money would we need to raise to afford it?
Those are great questions. I'm not even sure we're ready to answer that. Would you agree, Eli?
I've seen people do expensive solutions, and I've seen people work simple solutions with good and bad results, but simple solutions. I've seen, my Buddhist group is doing a hybrid meeting on the low budget, and it's coming off. It's working. So
yeah. And I've seen, I was a group I was in for a while that had, it's called The Owl. And that was a piece of conference. It was about $1,000. It was like a microphone with a camera that turns around. It was only about this big.
Yeah. I'm not up for that conversation right now. I want to say I'd rather, because I have to go soon anyway. So I
just, I thought it'd be good to get some feedback from people like that,
yeah, we can do a
see
poll
what the mood is
on the
about whether
meetup
people are ready or not.
You can do a meetup poll on Meetup or on Facebook or something. Because we don't have very many people here right now.
Do you think it makes a whole lot of difference whether you do a hybrid meeting or whether you do what you're doing right now on Zoom?
Well, in my Buddhist group, it does make a difference. Like and like Tom just came back from a conference, and right, it was different, right, Tom? It was, and it was different than having.
Yeah, I'm on a church board, and we've been having meetings for a couple. Well, more. I was on the church board for like a year and a half, and then we finally met in person, and it's way different. So.
The challenge with these boxes and this video stuff is you can't make eye contact with people.
Yeah.
You cannot make eye contact with each other. Whereas face-to-face in real life, you can do that and you can feel the person, experience the person. But here I'm looking at the camera right now. So you think I'm looking at you, but I'm not. So I'm looking right now, I'm looking at Tom. But what he sees is not my eyes looking at him.
Yeah, I get that.
So what you're talking about.
And two different discussion groups, and they're quite different. One is all on Zoom and the other one is in person. I wanted to merge the two together, but the Zoom people, it's impossible because they're from one end of the country to the other.
Well, that's the other advantage of having hybrid meetings. Yeah, it's available.
But the people in person are anti-Zooming. They just don't want to go there. But I have to tell you, it's interesting. It seems like the Zoom group, there's more, almost more intimacy with it. I don't know what that, there's some quality there about maybe the comfort of being in your own environment that allows people to share to more depth than but the group that meets in person is newer as well. And that could be the difference. They, to me, the group that meets in person, it's more about the social aspect of it rather than really getting the information part of it.
Yeah, I'm gonna bow out and let you guys talk about this, but I had a comment based on something I think Karen said and maybe Tom about the going out into consciousness and coming back and landing in the body and all that stuff. What occurred to me was like the Joseph Campbell hero's journey. That's kind of what that is. You're going out there, you're getting something, and then you bring it back to community. It's not just, you're not just taking it in for yourself and you get the benefit of it only, and even if you're not aware that you're gifting it to the community, that it's there, it's in you. And what we were talking about, like when you have the body language and all of that, when you speak, that can change how you speak, having come back with that. So anyway, I'll hang out if we're talking about that, and if we're not, I'm gonna go. So.
I'm going to comment. Well, I'm the outlier here because I'm in Arizona. But before you all go, I will let you know I'm going to be in Carlsbad from mid-July to mid-August. If any of you would like to meet for coffee or happy hour or
Sure.
whatever, I would just love that opportunity.
That sounds good, Trudy.
I'll
how
post
come-
my phone number in the chat or my
Okay.
email. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, let me know when you schedule that, Eli. That'd be fun.
Yeah,
Oh, you want a group thing or one-on-ones?
either. Doesn't matter to me. I just
Okay.
like meeting people. Meeting you guys. It's a pretty enlightened group, and that's hard to find in our society today. So
Jump in, Mike.
What's that?
Jump in.
Okay. Yeah, I was saying that it sounds like what Eloy is proposing or what he's trying to get at is a way that we could use technology in order to interact on a higher level. Now, I don't know exactly what you mean by hybrid.
Zoom and in person at the same time.
Okay, so you're talking about, okay, so you're just having some people Zoom and some people in person. Okay.
But you integrate, but it's integrated, you know, you make sure there's
Right.
that the in-person people can hear and see the people on Zoom and vice versa.
Right. So basically, I guess the next dimension that you could take that to would be something like a virtual reality interaction.
That sounds interesting.
And that, I mean, if you're talking about technology, that would be the next technological level of doing it. But I think before you even begin the practicality of something like that, what you'd have to do is you'd have to have a very real and fundamental reason for why you're virtually interacting with these people in order to accomplish a common and shared goal that would allow you to benefit from it at that level. And I think that's one of the things in which what I was talking about with, I guess, a few of the people when we broke off in our groups was the whole idea of the importance of creating a community or an environment that allows people to become the expression of their higher state of awareness for that functional purpose. And this is a fundamental part of, you know, when it comes back to what Keith was talking about in our need to deal with our shadows and having a therapy of being able to deal with those shadows. I still think that there's more than one way of dealing with that. You can deal with it on, say, like a symptomatic therapy, in dealing with it in a third dimensional realm of existence and awareness, into which you are counterbalancing your awareness of those shadows. Or you can deal with it by becoming aware of yourself on higher states of reality and awareness. So if you're aware of yourself on a fourth dimension and a fifth dimension state of reality and awareness, then you don't even need to deal with those issues or those counterbalances on that third dimensional realm. And one of the other aspects that Keith was addressing was the idea that what you learn on a spiritual level of self-realization and your awareness of that truth can't be taken back to the third dimensional state of how you live your life. Well, in one aspect, that's absolutely true, because those concepts, those ideals, and those truths can't be conveyed on the same level that you've self-realized them on that higher dimensional level of reality. However, they can be applied and used in a way that can still bring people together to where they can share them. It's kind of like Jesus was aware of himself on a higher state and a higher level of awareness and reality, which allowed him to perform his miracles on a third dimensional state, which makes the people say, ah, this is magic, because they couldn't understand how he performed those on a physiological level through his awareness of himself on a higher state of reality and existence. And that's basically all that it is that we can solve our problems on either the level that we're at, or we can more easily solve them by achieving higher levels of awareness and then helping the other people in the world become aware of themselves on those higher levels of reality and those higher dimensions of existence. And I think that what you basically have to do is create something like an institutionalization of truth. And the function of it would be to become a shared awareness of our spiritual oneness with all. And then you could start interacting like what you're talking about, Eloy, by doing things like virtual reality and us working on projects together on both those higher states of reality as well as our third dimensional state of reality.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of this is aspirational. The devil's in the details.
Yeah. Which is why which is why I keep coming back to the need to be as precise as we can with our language while still staying open for all the reason Larry and others said. Because when we're out in these other realms, those of us who are able to remember any of it when we come back into our 3D bodies, when we're back in our bodies, we have to use language to talk about it if we're going to talk about it. And that's like what Eloy was saying of the hero's quest. You go out and you have your quest and then you achieve it against the odds and you bring it back and share it with the tribe. Well, to bring it back to share it with the tribe, I'm equating with coming back, into our mundane reality here in our boxes. And then we have to use language to share it with each other. And so it's like an ongoing, never-ending project to become more skillful at how we communicate using the limitations of language in these limited bodies in order to share the access to these other treasures that exist beyond the physical realm.
That's true. I mean, you can either do that by trying to explain it to them on a third dimensional level of reality, or trying to create something that they can experience on a higher dimensional level of reality.
Or tell good stories.
Well, I mean, that's what parables were for. I mean, that's the reason why Jesus spoke in parables, was to help the people try to understand concepts that there was no way to convey in words the true meaning of.
Yeah.
And that's the nature of spirituality and spiritualism.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do that in one of two ways. You can either explain it to them in that third dimensional level in parables, or you can take them to the higher states of awareness and reality and let them experience it themselves.
Yeah.
I'm trying to sort out how, Mike, talking about the higher states, which could help you understand better the lower states. And I'm trying to see if we're dealing with semantics here or just talking about something different than my understanding and experience. So I'm looking for the functionality in this instead of it just being a bunch of concepts we're throwing around.
Okay, well, let me define it for you.
Let me
okay, go ahead.
You finish with my inquiry here. And a parallel piece is what you're talking about in an example of spiritual bypassing is a way to deal with these lower stages or experiences. Take care, Tom. Go eat. And yeah, so I'm trying to get past the abstractness of what I'm hearing you talk about, and I'm trying to get a sense as to where you're grounded in it experientially.
Okay. So if you think about our 3D state of existence, our purpose in everything that we do is based upon 3 dimensions of height, width, and depth, right?
Let me hold you up. You're still in abstract. Be where you are right now in that body and communicate to me.
Okay. So where I'm at right now and communicate to you, what do you want me to communicate to you?
Whatever you're wanting to communicate.
Okay. So obviously, we have problems in the world, correct? Problems that we have difficulty in solving, that we've always had difficulty in solving. Why do you think medicine at this state of our existence isn't capable of curing so many of the diseases that we have? Do you think it's because we're not technologically advanced enough to do that? Or do you think that our socioeconomic motivations hold us back from creating free medicine, free energy, in order to create a structure of society in which people can become the best that they can be?
It can be argued for both.
What do you
I
mean?
would agree. I think it's both.
Yeah, it can be both. You can argue it as both. It's a technological challenge or it's a consciousness challenge.
Well, I think it's more a challenge of consciousness than it is technology, because we have the ability and the technology right now to eliminate poverty and hunger in the world. But the only reason why we don't do that is because the powers that be on a conscious level have to deprive the rest of the world from reaching that state of awareness. Otherwise, they would lose everything that they treasure and have in a 3D state of reality that they've acquired, which is money, power.
Yeah, I won't disagree with that.
Okay, so in order to solve that problem, you would have to do one of two things. You would either have to find a way to help all the other people of the world interact and solve their problems by becoming an interactive community on a higher state of awareness, and leave those people behind back in their money-driven, motivated worlds. And then finally, when those people realize that what they have is meaningless and doesn't serve any purpose any longer, they too can come along and graduate to that higher level and structure of society.
You're speaking idealistically to me and not practically.
Well, I mean, if you want it in a practical manner, this is how you practically achieve it. First, you create an institutionalization of truth where the people don't have to lie to each other in order to acquire more things in life.
That's an ideal.
You don't think that's possible?
In the very smallest sense of the word term, it's possible. Is it probable? Not very likely.
Well,
you're talking about soon. Is it going to happen the next 100 years?
Mm-hmm.
My money's on, even though I won't be here, I won't care. My money's on, it's not going to happen.
And whose truth?
Sorry, Eli?
Whose truth? Institute of Truth. What truth? Which truth?
Well, I mean, yes, truth. Your definition of what is true and my definition of what is true may not be exactly the same, but that doesn't prevent us from being able to seek the truth together, whatever it may be, to the point that we can finally share a common truth.
I would agree with that. However, what about the people that don't care about the truth? They're more concerned about their pocketbooks, as it were, to allude to your earlier example. They don't care about the truth. They don't care about peace. They're really more concerned about warfare and domination and this, that, and the other.
Exactly. So what you have to basically do is you create a community of people who react to it in the way of truth, and you create a way into which they can interact with the people who don't want the truth, who want to maintain status quo in the way that it is. And you have that.
Mike, this is idealism again.
Be
practical. How are you going to do that? Get it beyond the idea. How are you going to do that? I'm certainly asking you these questions.
Let's let Trudy go. I'm gonna close this out pretty quick. So let's go with like closing remarks or something like that.
It's just that, everybody's perception of what the truth is different. And so there is no commonality of the definition of truth to begin with.
It's the nature of perception.
That
yeah.
whole thing is going to get muddied even further with AI, where, I mean, yeah, that's just my comment. It's AI is going to muddy this a whole lot more rather than make it clear. So I understand what you're trying to get at, Mike, that it's an idealized situation, but we're working
it's
toward that.
honorable.
We're just not anywhere
Well,
near it yet.
Let me ask you something, Trudy.
Well, close it out, Mike, because I'm going to go.
Okay. Do you think that AI is bad, or do you think it's
Okay?
It's neither good nor
I
bad.
think you want to keep
It's a
the
tool.
conversation going, Mike, and I want to close it out.
okay?
Yeah, that's a discussion that could last for months
Yeah.
and go on and on and on.
Well,
I think it's too soon to tell whether it's good or bad.
First, you have to
It probably
define
has
what's
both.
good and bad,
It's a tool,
and it's both good
Sure.
and bad. Yeah.
and tools can be used for either or.
That's right.
You just have to create a realm of existence in which people can use it for good instead of bad.
I want to thank all our contestants for playing the game tonight.
Thank you, Eli.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Good night.
Thank you,
Okay.
Mike.
Bye.
Good night.
Thanks for
For further information, including upcoming events, resources, links to our Facebook and Meetup pages, and our fabulous donate button, please visit our website at sandiegointegral.org. Donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue to provide information and connection within the Integral community.